Today, we're doing all things toddler meltdowns. We're talking to Devon Kuntzman, and she has the amazing Instagram account called Transforming Toddlerhood. She has a new book coming out, and we really dive into all things toddler tantrums, learning in the toddler years, and why every single age in the toddler years has a negative word that goes along with it and how to deal with that as a parent. So here we go. First of all, toddler expert, let's just talk about how you ended up as the toddler expert.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And yes, I'm very, very passionate about toddlers. And, okay, I have a background in psychology and child development. I'm an ICF certified coach. But, the thing that really matters of how I got here is that I was a nanny for many years and I spent a lot of time with toddlers. And I just started to notice not only my own frustration of when I felt like I was unheard or like this toddler wasn't doing what I was asking. And I just really started to see this disconnect between what adults expected of toddlers and what toddlers were actually capable of. And the more I noticed this glaring, big divide, then I realized that, oh my goodness, toddlerhood is a very critical developmental period, and we have to be talking about how to nurture these little ones even through the challenges that we have. And so that's how I started Transforming Toddlerhood back in 2018 when there was no one talking about toddlerhood. They were talking about pregnancy and babies and then children all lumped together, but no one was talking about toddlerhood.
Isn't it interesting that, like, I feel, people become parents and then you think about all these different times where you have in front of you of parenting, possible parenting challenges. You think about yourself as a child or as a teen, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't, wait to have to deal with that in parenting. And then you fast forward quickly to toddlerhood because it's really like the first chapter of parenting that all of a sudden your child starts having their own thoughts and feelings and opinions on certain things, and they test you. Can you kind of talk about why you think that this hasn't been paid attention to before, and that you're kind of like the original toddler whisperer with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, society was so inundated with this idea that toddlerhood is terrible. And for a long time, we just accepted that, right? And so people would just go into toddlerhood already like white knuckling it, bracing for impact. And then over the last, 15, 20 years, more and more research has come out really understanding what is happening in a child's brain from 0 to 5. And the more that we understand that development, we can understand behavior. And when we understand behavior, we can start to really change the conversation around toddlerhood because all behavior is communication. Toddlers are becoming their own person for the very first time. And it's frustrating. My goodness, when you have a baby, they generally go along with the flow, with your agenda. And then all of a sudden, this little being now has their own agenda. And you're like, whoa, everything feels out of control. What do I do here? So, what we typically do is like, try to grasp for more control, and then it creates more chaos and power struggles as your toddler just tries to be their own person. So I think that it was for a long time really easier to accept that toddlerhood is terrible and we just have to white knuckle through it. And then we started to realize that what we do in the first 5 years sets the foundation for the rest of your child's life with their brain architecture, with their resilience, with their emotional health. And we started to think, wow, okay, this is really important time. We should, really be looking at how we can optimize our child's first 5 years of life.
Well, it's really true because you think about, you hear about the terrible twos. It's like every age in toddlerhood has some kind of awful word that kind of goes with it.
Yeah.
So you really do, as a parent, you kind of anticipate the arrival of the terrible twos. What was three is like tricky three,
Or
four.
threenager.
Yeah, threenager, 4,
Mhm.
I've heard of just fucking 4.
Yeah, or fierce fours. There's so many names. You're right for every age.
I know for me that when I first entered toddlerhood with my oldest daughter, that understanding for my husband and I, understanding the, as you were saying, what was going on in the brain as far as like the development. And then also when they have meltdowns, the kind of lid flip of, what's happening in your toddler's brain and what you're really able to do as a parent with, not making that a teaching moment in that time where their lid is flipped. So there's so much that goes on there as far as like the understanding of what's going on in the brain during meltdowns, what's going on in the brain as they're, entering into that era of toddlerhood and growing. And, I know you talk about the first 5 years as being so essential in the development of a child, but what for you are like the biggest issues that come up in your line of work with interacting with parents who are, in the thick of it in the years of toddlerhood?
Yeah, some of the biggest challenges that parents are really facing during this time are, I think, twofold. It's the big emotions, right? I think the end result is the big emotions, but it will show up through toddlers wanting to have a sense of control because toddlers, the whole point of toddlerhood is to become their own person for the very first time, to really know that they're a separate entity or being from their parents and caregivers. And so with this comes children exerting their will, and we feel like we're losing control. So that brings up a lot of big emotions for us, big emotions for toddlers when we get locked into a lot of power struggles, tantrums, things like that. And then I think the other thing are these big behaviors, right? Because toddlers use behavior to communicate, especially when younger toddlers, ages 1 and 2. Ages 3 and 4, they're still using behavior, but they're also going to start using their words, saying things like, "You're a mean mommy, you're not my friend anymore," things like this. Really, what they're trying to say is, "I don't like that you said no," or "I really want another ice cream cone." That's what they're really trying to say. So, anyways, it's these big behaviors and big words coupled with toddlers really trying to have control over their environment as they discover what it means to be their own person, that I think just can unravel everyone's emotions during this time.
It's been really interesting also just to see, all the videos that are fed to you as a parent on Instagram of like these quick fixes for when your kid is having a meltdown, when you're at the park and they don't want to leave, when you say no to a sweet treat. Um, your whole mission behind what you do is not to do these quick fixes, but really to change the mindset and the framing for parents and caregivers with how they are interacting and also wrapping their head around understanding toddlerhood as a whole. Can you talk a little bit about that shift in mindset?
Yes, I mean, this shift in mindset is truly vital. And I know we're as a society, we gravitate towards, this instant gratification, because as human beings, that instant gratification feels really good. And we're kind of wired for it for today's society, like we get like same day delivery on Amazon and all the things, right? It's like we get things right now. So it's really challenging to understand that with toddlerhood, and you're dealing with a child's development, that it doesn't just switch like that. And so it's really challenging to be in this position, and we start to think our toddlers are just terrible, being bad on purpose. But really, what we need to understand is that your toddler is not being bad, they're having a hard time, and that all behavior is communication. When we start to make these shifts on how we see a child and their development and what the behavior means, when we take off that story that we're telling ourselves on the surface and we start just looking at the behavior for what it is, like, "Oh, I said no, and then my toddler hit me," without putting any label or meaning on it specifically, we can start to understand what was happening behind the behavior. Oh, they were feeling frustrated and they don't know how to deal with that frustration. And there are just not those quick, hacks and fixes out there for helping a child to develop their emotional and in return their behavior regulation that comes through building skills and that really support your child's brain development and brain maturation.
I always, for me personally, I do well with like script style parenting. So when I am in the thick of a moment with a meltdown or a emotional, situation with my girls, that I can kind of go back to a script in my head as the parent, um, to help de-escalate a situation, especially as there are situations that come up that as a parent can feel frustrating. You yourself have to, you know, uh, calm yourself down. So that's not something that is coming up with you trying to calm your child down. Um, are there any specific scripts that you have that have been helpful in these moments that parents find themselves in where nothing seems to work in a calm way with their child?
Hmm. Yeah, and the reason scripts can be so helpful is because oftentimes when we're trying to parent in a way that nurtures our child's development instead of working against it, it can kind of feel like learning a new language. So having these scripts can be really, really good guardrails into really training our brains and communicating in a different way and breaking that cycle of reactivity. But in the end, I think that the most important script that we can have is actually one that is for ourselves. Like in this moment, is telling ourselves that this is not an emergency. Because no matter what your child is doing, as long as they are physically safe and you are physically safe, once that has been established, you can take as long as you need to respond to what happened there. So you can take that time to calm down. And the way to really separate our emotions from our actions is to tell ourselves that this is not an emergency. That's how we break the cycle of reactivity. And that I think is really so foundational to be able to even execute any of the other scripts. Like if your child was hitting or took a toy from a sibling or something like that. Of course, we have, scripts for all of these things. And it's really hard to connect with your child, set a limit, and teach skills when you are just a millisecond from like flying off the handle. And so that's why I feel the most important script by far is telling ourselves this is not an emergency. We literally have to walk our brains off the ledge of dropping into that stress response.
When you're talking about, parents also getting to a place where they are calm and they're not reacting or flying off the handle, or, there's a lot of language about making sure that as parents that we can stay as calm as possible so we can help our child co-regulate and, calm down in a situation of high emotions or emotions escalating in a temper tantrum, et cetera. And there's also this big part of social media that kind of makes you as a parent, or I can just speak for myself as a parent, these videos come up and they're like, this is what you're doing to your child when you do X, Y, and Z. And this type of a thing lasts forever and it causes, anxiety and depression and, addiction and trauma and all of these different things that I feel as a parent make me so anxious of every little move. Is that going to mess my kid up? Is that going to mess my kid up? Like, and when I get too in my head about it, it feels like so overwhelming. And then I try to take a step back and just say, like, it's all going to be fine. It's all, we're just going to breathe through it, be calm, really, you know, I go to then like the logical things of what you're talking about with what's going on in their brain, what they're really trying to do, what's behind the emotion, how we can get down and, you know, really co-regulate with your child. But is that something that comes up a lot with the kind of anxiety with like every choice being so, you know, detailed and unpacked as being like an end all be all mess up for your child?
Oh my goodness. Yes. I mean, so it hurts my heart when I hear this coming from parents from social media because it is so true. You know, content these days, especially on Instagram, is to be seen, to be heard, and to stand out. It has to have the shock and awe factor. So there's so many people out there speaking in absolutes, and it can cause a lot of negative impact on parents and caregivers. I mean, to the point that I've thought about leaving social media so many times because it is so hard to watch and to be a part of this. And so the thing is that what I always tell parents and what I want parents to know is that first and foremost, your child needs a human being as a parent, not a robot. So we need to throw this idea of doing it perfectly out the door. Of course, like there is research that if you are constantly yelling at your child all day long, every day, yes, it can have similar impacts emotionally and psychologically as spanking your child. Yes, there's research out there like that. But at the same time, we also know that these moments of where we're human beings are opportunities for learning. They're opportunities for creating change. And so, say that, so the first thing I want to say about that is that you're allowed to learn alongside your toddler. You don't have to have it all figured out. And having feelings and emotions as a person shows your toddler that you're allowed to have feelings and emotions. And all human beings are going to lose it sometimes and be not in control of our words and actions. And when that happens, it's important to look at what we do after that. Do we repair the relationship? Do we do a redo of, oh my gosh, I just realized I did not mean to say that. That is not what I wanted to do. Here's what I wanted to do. And we do that redo. Are we looking in the rearview mirror and beating ourselves up for not doing it right? Or are we looking through the windshield to the road ahead saying, this is what I learned. This is what I'm going to practice next time. Because in the end, to be a good parent, it's more about willingness to be human, willingness to be vulnerable, and willingness to practice and not always be right. Kids need that way more than a perfect parent.
When you talk about that, you know, like a lot of parents sit and think like, oh, I should have handled this differently. Oh, I messed this up. I'm going to mess my kid up forever. um, it shines a light on this kind of, you know, new idea when it comes to parenting of the repair, even with toddlers. Um, Going back, talking through a situation that maybe you felt like you didn't handle in the best way because your own lid flipped, um, which I think is a huge relief to parents because it doesn't leave them feeling like, oh, okay, I lost, you know, I said something in the heat of a moment and my kid's going to be messed up forever. You really allow um, this moment of healing and repair to happen after you can go back and talk to your child and repair that moment, or as you were just saying, redo that moment. I think it would also be helpful if maybe for people who have toddlers or are about to experience toddlerhood, can you kind of walk us through what happens in a child's brain or a child's body when they're having an epic meltdown that you as a parent are witnessing in a helpless way?
Yeah. Um, so during this time, what we really need to understand is that our toddler's brain is far from being fully mature, and toddlers are can very easily or very quickly drop down into The lower regions of their brain, which is primarily responsible for, basic functions like, breathing, swallowing, things like that, but also the stress response. So that area of the brain is just really driven by emotions and fear. And so it's very easy for kids to get dysregulated and drop down to that area of the brain. And when that's happening, they're cut off from the upper brain or that area, the prefrontal cortex, that is not very mature. And that's the part of the brain that is just responsible for the emotional regulation, logical thinking, impulse control, all of these things. And that's why we see toddlers really struggling with this. So during a tantrum or a epic meltdown, in this moment, it's our job to kind of walk our child back up the steps from the lower brain to the upper brain. And in these moments, what kids are wondering is like, am I too much? Am I seen? Am I heard? Am I loved? Even though I have fallen to pieces. That's the type of reassurance kids need. So, just understanding that your toddler is not giving you a hard time on purpose or being bad can, when you switch that lens that you're looking at that tantrum through, you can start to see, gosh, they're just having such a hard time right now. And it can be exacerbated by needs being unmet, like saying they might be hungry or tired or things like this. And so, truly understanding all the things that can be happening beneath the surface of the behavior allows us to approach these situations with a little more calm and compassion, and also transform the behavior, because when we address the root, that's where the transformation happens.
If we're painting a picture here and we're just talking about, let's say you have two kids, both are toddlers, you're having a day or they're having a day, and then therefore you are having a day. Things are just not going right. They're fighting, they're each having a meltdown. Um, it's a whole thing. What's the number one thing that you would tell parents to do to handle a situation like that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing would be is to create that physical safety. So I started to mention this before, but when we are in a moment where we are so overwhelmed and we are about to jump on or have jumped on our children's emotional roller coaster, and now we're like, okay, who's going to put the brakes on? We're all on this roller coaster now. We have to be able to get off that roller coaster. And the way to do that is by establishing that physical safety. So if like even two siblings are really into it, like we've got to separate them. We've got to get in between them. Or say you have a toddler that's hitting you, you've got to put them down or put a cushion in between you. Because the more that we are perceiving a threat, whether there's an actual threat there or a perceived threat, the deeper that we are going to drop down into that stress response and become dysregulated and more likely to yell and just respond in a way that we don't really envision for what we want as parents and caregivers. So, establishing that physical safety can be so important, because from there, you are truly able to say, okay, I can pump the brakes. I can take a moment, take a deep breath, and get back in control of myself. Because in the end, we cannot control another human being. We can influence them. We have positive influence, negative influence, but we can't truly control another human being. We can only truly control ourselves. And so that's when we turn the focus from what we can't control to what we can control. That's where we start gaining some power and empowerment that's going to allow us to respond in a different way. And if you don't respond to what happened for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, it truly doesn't matter, because what matters most is that you're able to ground yourself and get back into control of your behavior, your words and actions and emotions.
So, number one thing when if you're a parent having a melt and your kids are having a meltdown, number one thing is establishing physical safety. This is not an emergency. Everyone is safe. You know, take a deep breath and proceed. What's next?
Yeah. So from there, we make sure everyone's safe. Then we work on calming ourselves down. And then from there, we look at, okay, well, usually it's upholding the limit, right? So sometimes tantrums happen because you set a limit. So you want to make sure that you're upholding the limit in these moments, because if you backtrack on the limit at this point, then you've reinforced the behavior and you've taught your child that this type of response in general can get you what you want. So we don't want to reinforce that, because that's when toddlers will start using tantrums in a strategic way to get their needs and desires met. So we want to make sure that we're still upholding the limit, and then we need to just hold space. I think the biggest misconception about tantrums is there's a lot to do, but actually a lot of times during tantrums, less is more. Sometimes we give a few words of reassurance, something like, I know this is upsetting, I'm here. Maybe we sit beside them. Maybe we sit, nearby somewhere. Maybe we have other things that we have to do. So we go check on our child, let them know we're there. Then we go do what we need to, come back and check on them. It's going to look different in every situation. But I think something that can be really interesting is that sometimes we get stuck just sitting there and validating. And that's fine. It can be helpful, but sometimes toddlers need a little bit of support in moving forward and moving on. And I can give an example. For one day, my son was having a tantrum. He wanted another mango bar from the pantry. And I said, I'm sorry, the mango bars are finished for today. And he had a big tantrum. And I could have waited there for him to be the one to say he's going to move on. But as the leader and guide, I was like, okay, he might need a little bit of support. So instead of standing there and just waiting, I went over, I put a Tony on his Tony box. I got out the magnetiles and I started building a tower. Within a few minutes, he came over and he started playing with me and he was fine. So sometimes kids need us to help them move forward before they will be able to move forward.
It's I instantly go back to this one meltdown that my daughter had that I just was like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here. And I remember I had her on a couch and she was just she was having a meltdown. And I remember I walked away to give her some space and kept checking in and saying, I'm here when you're ready. I'm here when you're ready. I'm going to give you some space to, just to calm down. And I'm also going to calm down. And it was over something, as simple as what you're saying, a mango bar, not being able to have a mango bar, as most of these things are.
Right.
And for for me and my personality, I'm much more into typically I need to fix this right away. What can I do to fix? So for me, giving my daughter space in a moment of her having big feelings felt very unnatural to me and left me in a place of oh my God, am I messing her up that I'm walking away and giving her space and checking back in? Is this wrong? Is this not? And it turned, it took a little bit of time, but she ended up calming down. And then, once she was calm, we started playing with her dolls and then we could talk as she got older, we were able to re loop back to that situation at a calmer, less emotionally driven time and say hey, maybe next time let's take some deep breaths or let's go outside or let's take a walk or and I just know for me and I'm sure this happens with other parents in that moment that if you've had a certain way of dealing with certain situations your whole life, I have been in this mode of I need to fix this right away. Changing that as a parent dealing with a toddler feels unnatural and almost feels wrong in the beginning. And then with practice, just as we're learning right alongside our children learning, it gets more comfortable and then you kind of get into a groove and a routine with it. But for any parent out there who feels like it felt unnatural the first time or will feel unnatural, I'm right there to say that to me, I was this is just, I don't even know what I'm doing. It felt like I was doing something uncomfortable.
Yeah, this is so common because it really has to do with the messages that we've been taught about feelings and emotions. And oftentimes we've been taught, both just silently from society and sometimes, actively from families and how we were raised is that there's some emotions that are good and we want to just spend all our time with those ones. And there's other emotions that are bad. And so when we're faced with these toddler tantrums, it's truly an invitation to expand our capacity to be with the full spectrum of emotion. And that is really uncomfortable for the majority of us because we were taught that certain emotions were bad and they need to go away and be fixed and get back to those happy ones. And so it's truly just little by little expanding our capacity to be with that full spectrum of emotions.
It really is true because I know that, there are so many of us who grew up with people saying like, "Okay, stop crying," or, "You don't need to cry about that," that kind of a thing. And I remember someone saying that to one of my girls, and my sister overheard it and she was like, "Do not say that to them. It's okay for them to cry and it's okay for them to have feelings. Let them have their feelings." And I remember overhearing her say that and I was like, that's such a different way than so many of us grew up, not saying anything negative, but it's just a different way of, allowing children to feel their feelings and have space for their feelings. And I don't know if this is true, and maybe you know whether or not it's true. I remember seeing or reading something about allowing children to have their emotions, allowing a child to have a tantrum, feel their emotions, and then also trying to arm them with tools with how to manage those emotions. So as they get older, they are able to be 15, 16 years old, or 25 or 35 years old and say, "I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now," or "I'm feeling angry right now. This is the practice that I'm going to go to," whether that's deep breathing, a walk outside in nature, um, moving their body, dancing, doing something silly to kind of snap out of it. Having different tools or practices that you are able to give to your child from the beginning at a very early age with the hope and the goal that this is something that will last them through their life as being a tool that they can use and go to in their toolbox to help them calm down with whatever life throws their way. And that to me also, as a parent, made me kind of get out of like this worry that I was doing soft parenting or gentle parenting, and allowed me to say like, okay, I'm going to, kind of give these tools and tricks to my children with the hope that when they're 16, it's not like, "Oh, I'm angry, I'm going to turn to drinking, or I'm going to turn to lashing out, or, doing behaviors that maybe generations ahead of us kind of resulted in." Is that something that has come up a lot?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is part of really my signature framework. And I talk about this in depth in my upcoming book, this idea of what I call the recipe for effective discipline. The recipe for effective discipline has three ingredients: it has creating connection, setting and following through on limits, and teaching skills. And I truly believe that all three of these ingredients need to be present to truly have healthy, effective discipline. And what's interesting about the last part about teaching skills is that teaching those skills, as you beautifully illustrated, that happens in the calm moments. If we're trying to teach a child a skill at the peak of a tantrum, they can't hear us. They are lost in that stress response and they're in survival mode. Their brain, the part of the brain that's, supporting learning is not online right now. So we want to focus on building those skills, teaching those skills, practicing those skills in the calm moments. And then as children grow and mature, they're going to be able to access them in the tough moments. But one thing that parents usually miss and are very surprised to hear, and it goes back to what I was talking about earlier about kids don't need a robot as a parent, but a true, like a human being, is that if we want our child to be able to put on loudspeaker saying like, oh, I'm feeling frustrated, things like this, it starts with us modeling this behavior. And this is why it's okay to not be a robot. It's okay to feel frustrated and say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I feel like no one is listening to me or no one hears me. I feel very unheard right now. And you, as a parent, putting that on loudspeaker and then modeling whatever type of grounding technique or calming technique that works for you is literally teaching your child that it's okay to feel and have emotions, but it's showing them a healthy way to work with and process that emotion. And we're not going to do it perfect every time. That's why we have the opportunity to repair, the opportunity to do redos, but we actually have such a beautiful opportunity to model these skills, and toddlers will learn so much from us. But that we actually have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and to be imperfect. And I think, how cool is it that our kids can truly learn through our imperfections?
When I heard that, to me, that's such a relief to parents to be able to say to their children or in front of their children, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. And I'm going to take some deep breaths. And, to be able, it makes such sense, but it's also such a foreign concept, I think, to so many um, parents who might be embarking on this journey of all of a sudden your child has feelings for the first time in toddlerhood and like how to manage that. So I think, this book that you're putting out is such a genius concept. It's so needed for all of us in the toddler years. And it's such a freeing concept to be able to humanize yourself as a parent and be able to kind of get in the mindset of you learning right alongside your child and that you're kind of in it together. So I'm really grateful that you're putting this book out there, and also, obviously so grateful for your social media account and that you are able to reach as many parents and caregivers as you are. And also that people will be able to have a physical copy of all of your wisdom in a book, which is incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm super excited about it. It's the book that I wish I had had and that every parent could have, because it's meant to be your companion in the tough moments.